My name is Amina Dakir. I'm 30 years old. I'm from the southern part of an African tribe called Iwabi. Today, I decided to share this story with the world. A story I have never told anyone before, not after my escape, not to my parents, nor the friends I made after getting my freedom in my later years. This is the story of a dark past I've never shared with anyone until now. Today I'm bearing it on the table and letting it all out. And I hope that you, who is listening, may either share sympathy in my story, or rather bury yourself in the very same high emotions I experienced each night when my slave master made me do it with his horses. I was just 18, a girl from a desperately poor family. I had just began to blossom into a beautiful and voluptuous curvy woman. Well, that was what everyone said. My father was sick, my mother cried constantly, and our tiny, rundown shack was all we had. And even that wasn't enough to survive. We needed money, desperately, so my parents made a choice. They sold me, for the price of a loaf of bread, just to pay up my father's never-ending hospital bills. I was sold to a man called Greg. He traveled with me to the States, and that was where it all began. I remember standing in front of that large, imposing house facing the man called Master Greg. He was about 50, with deep lines etched into his face, his eyes cold and calculating. His skin was rough from years of hard labor, and his hands were calloused and large. His muscles rippled under his shirt, each movement heavy with strength. He was the kind of man who frightened me, and I couldn't help but shudder at the thought of being sold into his care. My heart raced as I was led to the stable. The smell of hay and manure filled my senses. The barn was vast, filled with horses that moved restlessly in their stalls, their breath hot against the cold air. Master Greg owned a stable. He was a man who lived alone, working with his horses, taking care of them like they were his only companions. After showing me around, he led me to my room. It wasn't much, just a tight room with a small frail bed. Each night, I laid in the small cot Master Greg gave me, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, of finding a way out. But the fear of what might happen if I failed to escape kept me paralyzed. I imagined Master Greg's eyes watching me as I slept. His heavy footsteps seemed to always echo in the silence, as he paced the sitting room just outside my room door, every night. Each night, I sat up in the corner of my room, my hands trembling as I clutched the edge of my bed. But I never made that brave move. Every day, Master Greg gave me tasks to complete, cleaning the horses, brushing their coats and mucking out the stalls. He rarely spoke, only instructing me in short, sharp commands. It quickly became a daily routine. But then, something unexpected began to happen. It started on a cold, somber midnight. The house was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of wind outside. Master Greg called me out. I shivered as I unlocked the knob of my wooden door. Master had never called me out by this time before. Greg did not smile. He just handed me a metal choker and asked me to put it on my neck. I did. Then he locked it tight and slid the keys into his back pocket. He said the words that I later got to hate for the most part of my life. Follow me. I obeyed. Greg led me to the stable. That night the stable was filled with the smell of hay and manure. Greg dragged me in, and I cannot forget the restlessness of the horses in their stalls. When Greg pushed me to the bare floor, I looked up at him in terror. Greg made a hush sign, asking me not to scream. In that moment, I knew something terrifying was about to happen to me. But I was too afraid of my master, and I held my breath. Greg walked to one of the stalls and unlocked Jackie. Jackie was his favorite, tall, dark, But that wasn't my focus at the moment. There was something rather odd about the horses that night. They all seemed energetic, hopping to and fro in their cages. It seemed like they had been drugged. Something I got to find out later was true. After it happened the first night, Greg whispered something I've never heard before into his horse's ear. Then he drew out a wooden seat and sat comfortably on the chair, lighting a cigarette. He blew out the smoke that filled the small space of air that separated me and him in the small corner of the huge stable. I kept looking at him in fright and back at the horse, but I dared not to utter a word. Then with a cold whisper, Greg said, "Take it off." I knew what he meant, and I did not argue. I was wearing nothing under, and I obeyed my master. I threw down my white cotton gown, that had now turned off white, because I had used it for so long. I lay bare before Greg. "Get up," he said starkly. I stood up before him. His look became more intense, his gaze fixed on the huge melons on my chest. He kept staring at them for over 3 minutes without saying a word. I could see that thing get hard. I looked away. I didn't know how to feel. Greg pulled me closer and tied my hands with large ropes. I stood frozen. I dared not to utter a word. Then, as I stood stacked before him, Greg began to fondle them. I held my breath as his huge, damp hands pressed against the two plump oranges on my chest. He let his hand glide freely as he sat on his chair. Then suddenly, his grip became tighter and firm. He pulled them hard as his lull hardened. Though I had a strong sensation, I couldn't speak a word. I wanted him to stop, but somehow I wanted him to continue. I could not understand the sensation. He looked satisfied. Then, it got messy. He asked me to lay down. I laid against the heap of haze that was scattered around on the stable floor. I did not argue. My only duty was to do as my master desired. Spread it open, Greg said, in a cold voice. I did, but now my heart was racing faster than I could count. In a second, I had 1,000,000 heartbeats. I kept looking at my master in fright. My eyes gleamed with terror. My mind was screaming. What was the horse going to do? Greg walked up to the horse standing a few distance away and whispered something to Jackie, and it neighed loudly. And then, it pounced on me. Greg sat on his seat, watching. My screams were loud and agonizing. But Greg leaned over and pressed against my mouth with his hand. When it was over, Jackie walked on his own back into his stall. By this time I was sweating and panting, and I could not seem to catch my breath. I looked up at Master Greg, and all I could see for the first time was a huge grin etched on his pale, wrinkled face. Good girl, he whispered. Then he unlocked my chains and we left the stable. I cleaned myself up, but as the water from the showers poured over my skin, tears fell freely from my eyes. I could not argue with my master, and I could never question him. This became my reality. Every night we did the same routine, each night filling Master Greg with an unspeakable satisfaction I have never seen a man have in my life. This continued even into my later years. After years of doing it with Jackie every week to satisfy Master Greg, Greg passed away one night right inside the stable. I later got to find out he had been battling an incurable illness, and he just wanted to fulfill his craziest fantasies before he died. Greg left the house and the stable to me and $5,000,000 as an inheritance in his will. A payment, I guess, for all I had to go through to keep him pleased in his last days. Today, after 10 years since Greg passed, I get to share this personal story which I have told one till date. I sold off the house. It bore an unspeakable memory. Today I am a successful business millionaire in a foreign land. People always wonder how a black woman made so much money in a very short time, and at a very young age. Well, if only I could share this story with everyone. But I can't. This is a secret between me and my master no one would ever get to know. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy this type of content and want to get more anonymous stories like this, please support the channel by subscribing. Leave a like and share your thoughts with us. Don't forget to stay wet, as there's more to come.